have the video. Rhinedottir's goal to make a descender, Alchemy and the Cosmic Man. I don't even know who that could be referring to.
So 4.5 is just around the corner, and it seems a
Well, we kind of have it already, but it's fine.
little on the sparse side, which is fine. We can all take a little vacay before the next immense lore drop. Also, they did announce their collab with the Discovery Channel.
I don't know what they're talking about, to be honest. Sparse side? Absolutely not. I can't even copium it, dude. I can't.
So I'm personally excited for David Attenborough-style documentaries with Kave's voice actor.
Who would win in a fight? 10 billion lions or the sun? How can they fight the sun? They can do their best. Okay, what about 10 trillion lions? Mathematically, the sun would win. But spiritually, I think the lions would win.
I agree. I do think they would win spiritually.
We also have an alchemy event coming up, which is great timing because there's been a lingering question in my head for a few months now. Alchemy was essential to Khaenri'ahn civilization.
Honestly, chat, instead of this new combat event being used to test a character, I think they should use the alchemy event instead. I actually think we should get a new character that every time you use their skill, you have to fit puzzle pieces together. And if you fit them together perfectly to get like the 300% maximum, it does 300% more damage.
As it was underground and had to create its own resources. And the Narcissenkreuz Ordo from Fontaine extensively studied Khaenri'ahn alchemy. But many Narcissenkreuz notes outright say that Khaenri'ahn alchemy was flawed. It was out of order, sloppy, expedited.
Yes.
So my burning question has been, what exactly was wrong with Khaenri'ahn alchemy? I'll go ahead and spoil the punchline here.
Dark magic.
And honestly, I think Narcissenkreuz may have completely misunderstood Khaenri'ahn alchemy, and I think this misunderstanding informs a more significant question. What exactly is Rhinedottir, the great alchemist and sinner of Khaenri'ahn, up to?
Something tells me that she's might be planning to make a descender.
Because I think Narcissenkreuz and Rhinedottir were ultimately trying to do the same thing, but with very different
If I'm right,
approaches.
10 gifted, chat.
I want to answer this question, building on some existing theories by others.
Kabbalah?
And maybe
What was that?
to answer this question, building on some existing
Kabbalah in the world building of Genshin Impact Part 2 descending to the garden.
theories by others, and maybe even give a clear answer as to why the sibling isn't a descender. Intrigued yet? So let me start off with some background to explain Narcissenkreuz's problem with Khaenri'ahn alchemy.
Alchemy 101.
Historically, alchemy was an old practice of transformation, like trying to turn lead into gold. More broadly, it was a branch of proto-science that attempted to understand the natural world before science was really a thing. The primary motivation of alchemy was the magnum opus, which was the process of creating a transcendent substance from the ubiquitous and undifferentiated substance making up the universe. This transcendent substance could be symbolized by the Philosopher's Stone, or the Elixir of Life, or even just a cure-all medication. There isn't a standard recipe of the magnum opus, it depends on who you're referencing. But the four critical stages are Nigredo, the blackening, Albedo, the whitening, Citrinitas, the yellowing, and Rubedo, the reddening. Although after the 15th century, this was often reduced to 3 steps with black, white, and red, merging Citrinitas with Rubedo.
Oh, interesting.
The final step, Rubedo, is associated with the Philosopher's Stone, usually portrayed as a bright blood red. As a proto-science, alchemy corresponds to real chemical processes which were not understood at the time. For example, using heat to turn calcium carbonate into quicklime, or calx, or combining mercury with sulfur to create the red mineral, cinnabar.
Interesting.
But without a more concrete scientific basis...
God, dude, Genshin is so fucking smart sometimes with the characters and the things that they reference, like with Albedo referencing Albedo and Cinnabar with the Cinnabar spindle and everything. Dude, that's so fucking clever.
That was inextricably linked with esoteric and spiritual practices, or ties to the divine. For example, Maria the Prophet, an early alchemist who likely proposed those 4 steps, attributed spiritual meaning to the number 4. 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, and out of the 3rd comes the 1 as the 4th. Here, 4 represents a sacred unity. This is a very specific example, but put a pin in it for now. With the advent of modern chemistry, alchemy didn't hold up too well. But as recently as the past century, alchemy re-emerged as a metaphorical tool in psychology. That is, we can study the architecture of the psyche by referring to early attempts to rationalize the natural world.
The architecture
of the psyche. To paint a picture of psychological change, the beginning starts with Nigredo, which is representative of inner chaos and suffering. It ends when the blackness disappears, when dawn arrives and a new day breaks. Albedo. But Albedo is an abstract and ideal state that cannot live or sustain itself. It needs blood or the life force.
Which makes a lot of sense with Albedo being Albedo.
This is Rubedo, or the redness of life. With that, the opus is complete and fully realized. So, here's the thing about its application in Genshin, though, and some of you might have already picked up on it.
The inversion.
So, Albedo is a creation of Rhinedottir, and he practices the alchemy of Khaenri'ahn, called Chemia. When Albedo describes the process of Chemia, the steps are Nigredo, Albedo, Rubedo, and then Citrinitas.
Yeah.
The final two stages are swapped. This is specifically a Khaenri'ahn quirk. Multiple Narcissenkreuz notes point this out. There could be a simple explanation here. Historically, IRL, there was no real consensus about the exact recipe, with many having more steps and rearranging the order of some smaller steps. And, more importantly, Citrinitas is often indistinct from Rubedo.
Because, like, you've got to think as well, if the final step is, like, the yellowing or even goldening, right, and gold is gold, or, like, named that for a reason, and it is the final stage, that's interesting.
Trinitas and Rubedo describe the golden hour as the sunrise turns from black to white to a mix of yellow and red. But the emphasis on the reversal seems to imply something more important.
Oh?
Here's what I think is going on. I think Narcissenkreuz took this too literally. Despite Narcissenkreuz's emphasis on the spiritual and esoteric, they missed some essential details.
Fiara,
details which made Rhinedottir the great alchemist and Chemia a profound art.
Uh-huh.
So, what are these details? What difference does the order of Citrinitas really make? The answer lies in a much less literal interpretation of alchemy.
Yellow to gold.
Carl Jung, a psychoanalyst of the 20th century, is perhaps best known for his work on dreams and the unconscious in psychoanalysis. Jung incorporated alchemy into his psychoanalysis as part of exploration into the unconscious. To be clear, he did not actually believe in the physical transformative ability of alchemy. However, he asserted that the symbolism of alchemy was a reflection of the unconscious psyche. Jung has written a few variations on this. Everything unknown is filled with psychological projection. It is as if the investigator's own psychic depths were mirrored in the darkness. So, in pre-science society, nature was a complete unknown, and alchemists projected their unconscious to comprehend the world. Jung's extensive dive into alchemy, as his student Marie von Franz said, wading through a humongous pile of duk-duk looking for anything useful, was motivated by the search for understanding the unconscious psyche.
Yeah, okay.
As such, the magnum opus became an emblem for psychological transformation to Jung. To say the least, he's written a lot about it. In The Integration of the Personality, Jung specifically addresses these final stages of Citrinitas and Rubedo. After Albedo, there's the reddening, the red tincture that can turn base metals into silver or gold. But the reddening is not always the culmination of the procedure, not at any rate when gold is the end in view.
That's the thing, right?
Here, he suggests that Citrinitas can indeed be a final stage. He goes on, the Philosopher's Stone is the most prevalent of all alchemistic conceptions, and was conceived either as an instrument or as an absolute end in itself. In the first case, it may be the red powder or tincture, but in the second case, it is a thoroughly mystical being having body, soul, and spirit, and depicted as winged or hermaphroditic. This winged being is a product of the classical magnum opus, Rebus, who is also equated with the Philosopher's Child or the Philosopher's Stone. Rebus starts off
Harry Potter reference? Gasp. Are you saying the Philosopher's Stone is a Harry Potter reference? Because, I mean... I get it. But it's more like Harry Potter referenced alchemy for it.
off as prima materia, the chaotic substance that makes up the universe, and becomes its own being or self. Rebus represents a perfect being who encapsulates and combines dualities. For example, the feminine and masculine essence, the sun and the moon. Rebus is
not
a
like
union
this.
of opposites.
Not
As
more
a
sun
quick
and moon,
disclaimer
dude.
before I move on, admittedly, in his other works, Jung has also disregarded Citrinitas or combined it with Rubedo as well. This passage is an outlier, and thus the speculation and interpretation may be wildly wrong, but
You know what's fucking hilarious about that image of that dude? Every time I see it now, I just see Doro. I just see Doro, dude, because he uses that image for some of his thumbnails for like the quiz shit and just puts his fucking head on it.
and thus the speculation and interpretation may be wildly wrong. But regardless, Jung is making a distinction here. Depending on the order, the Philosopher's Stone can be an instrument or complete in itself. The instrument could make gold metal, but if the gold is the end in view, the gold is something entirely different.
What is
And,
it?
as
A
I've
human
tried to
called
stress,
gold.
the significance lies within the symbolism. To understand this, there's two important aspects here.
The Cosmic Man. Okay, who the fuck is
first
the
important
Cosmic Man?
aspect to understand is the idea of opposites and their role in a process called individuation, which is a core tenet and goal of analytical psychology. There exists this duality of the conscious and unconscious, its persona, our face to the world, versus its shadow, which is unseen. The unconscious, or shadow, is instinctive and drives a great deal of our behavior. The process of individuation refers to the integration or union between the conscious and unconscious
What would
in
that
order
mean?
to become a whole being. Jung calls this whole being the self. This is similar to how Rebus, the androgynous winged figure, combines
That's
opposites.
a mood.
Because Jung saw alchemy itself as a metaphor for individuation. The second aspect involves the idea of archetypes.
Oh god.
Archetypes are innate, universal, and
Bro, archetypes in general can get so fucking complex.
unconscious building blocks of the psyche. They're manifested in patterns shared across cultures. These are instinctive tendencies to represent motifs. For example,
Wait, I've never seen that.
these
He
are
actually draws like
instinctive
a
tendencies to
cat or something. That's cute, dude.
represent motifs.
Bring it to life.
For example,
Like a
the
cat with a
Virgin Mary
man
is
in
a
its tail.
conscious representation of the unconscious archetype of the mother, representing nurturing, compassion, purity, and giving life.
Mm-hmm.
There are many archetypes, and Jung thought that these archetypes can be used as personal guiding tools for the discovery of the self.
Yes.
One such archetype is the Cosmic Man, which itself represents the goal of the individuation process. The Cosmic Man archetype actually represents a lot of things, like both the beginning and the goal. The seed of creation, found in everyone, pervasive in the universe. The Cosmic Man is manifested in creation myths across the world. This includes Ymir, Panku, Gaiomart, Purusha, Adam Kadmon, and Adam. And in many of these stories,
Jesus.
the body parts of the Cosmic Man become the universe itself. Side note, if you've read the Genshin webcomic, some of these names might sound familiar to you, because Venti talks about 3 of them creating a universe.
Oh?
Anyway, because of the role
Where? Oh, I guess Pangu.
talks about 3 of them
Ymir.
creating a universe. Anyway,
shit,
because
yeah.
of the role
Okay.
of seeding life, both Jung and
Interesting.
his student von Franz use Primordial Man interchangeably with Cosmic Man.
You read the
Cosmic
comments, Brian?
Human
I've read the
or
manga,
Primordial
but it was a long
Human
time ago.
is more accurate, though, because of its androgynous nature, combining feminine and masculine elements. The Cosmic or Primordial Human is completely individuated and whole. It represents a fully integrated self. Notably, Jungian thought recognizes a quaternary structure of the Cosmic Man, meaning the number 4 appears a lot in creation myths. In fact, Jung put a lot of thought into the unconscious attributes of the number 4 as a symbol for completeness and perfection.
Unity and totality.
Which is interesting,
that makes sense
given
based
Maria
on
the Prophet's
one becomes
emphasis
2, 2
on the
becomes 3,
special
and out
meaning
the third
of the
comes
magnum
one
opus
as the
having 4
fourth.
steps. And Jung saw this too. His interpretation was that 1 is a singular whole, and 2 represents conflict and opposition. 3 is the rejoining bond, and 4 represents the new perfect whole.
Wait, that doesn't really make sense to me. Why would 1 be whole but kinda lonely, and 4 be a perfect whole? Interesting. I guess maybe 1 is like the point at the top, opposition and conflict go around, the rejoining bond to make the perfect whole? I don't know.
As remember, Jung saw alchemy itself as a metaphor for individuation.
Rhinedottir. Okay, now we get to the more
to tie
interesting
all
stuff.
these points together, Jung describes 2 different versions of the magnum opus. Where Albedo is the final product, the Philosopher's Stone is an instrument. Where Citrinitas is the final product, the Philosopher's Stone is a mystical being representing the individuated self.
Yes.
It's not really that Albedo and Citrinitas are flipped, as much as Citrinitas as the end in view is completely different from Citrinitas as an intermediate step. Furthermore, through a Jungian lens, this mystical being could be the cosmic or primordial human. So, to bring this back to Genshin, I think the misunderstanding by Narcissenkreuz lies here. Narcissenkreuz has a strict classical idea of what alchemy is. The reality, though, is that there are different types depending on the end goal. For example, yes, Khaenri'ahn did use Chemia for practical and mundane reasons. To make bread, for example, because they wouldn't have been able to grow wheat. But Rhinedottir was also doing something because they wouldn't—
Wheat? Red is the foundational principle of the Philosopher's Stone, while yellow represents gold and mortal temptation. Yellow is simply bait. Red is the final goal. However, Khaenri'ahn would likely seek the truth for gold's sake before turning that truth into a bread production pipeline.
have been able to grow wheat.
What the
But
fuck?
Rhinedottir was also doing something different as well. Something more extraordinary. Consider this. Narcissenkreuz says that Citrinitas, or yellow, represents gold and mortal temptation. Yellow is bait, the real goal is red, the Philosopher's Stone. But in Chemia, Citrinitas is when the meaning of the object being transmuted has finally been brought to light, and it becomes gold itself, revealing its true value.
Yes.
See, they're talking about 2 very different types of gold, though. When you contrast the 2, you can draw parallels directly to Jung's differentiation. The Philosopher's Stone as an instrument that can create gold, versus a Philosopher's Stone which is a more transcendent gold in itself. Neither is wrong, as it depends on the goal. This is what Narcissenkreuz did not understand. So what was Rhinedottir trying to—
This is what I don't understand now. Okay, I've picked up on like everything in this video other than this.
is a Philosopher's Stone, which is a more transcendent gold in itself. Neither is wrong, as it depends on the goal. This is what
I guess
Narcissenkreuz
that does
did
make
not
sense.
understand. So what was Rhinedottir trying to do with Chemia then?
That's not Rhinedottir.
Well, if we follow Jungian
That's
thought
right.
here, she wanted to use alchemy to become or create a cosmic man or primordial human. This is the gold Philosopher's Stone. Winged, androgynous, fully individuated, associated with the number 4, and symbolic of creation and the—
How cool would it be if gold has wings?
universe.
Rhinedottir has wings, dude.
This description
Goddamn.
may sound familiar. A being who seeded life used their body parts, or maybe an eggshell, to create a microcosm of the universe. Androgynous with wings and a crown. Also has primordial in its name. You know, someone like the primordial one. And we can take this even further. If we do assume the primordial one is the heavenly principles, Jung's mystical being may more broadly represent a descender. Because a descender can create a world and has a will that can rival an entire world or universe. There is
That is
also
true.
a shared recurring theme of the number 4, the quaternary structure of the Cosmic Man, the 4 stages of alchemy or individuation, and 4 Descenders, 4 Samsaras, 4 Shades of the Primordial One. It's no coincidence that Genshin references the rule of 3, but it's more like the rule of 3+1 as we see on Surumi Island or during Aranyaka.
Oh god.
Good omens must occur 3 times for good fortune to truly descend. And you must forge past obstacles 3 times to succeed on the 4th. Paimon
So
even
it's always
says,
the 4th that's
"You know what, this is garbage.
important."
Paimon still thinks it should be called the rule of 4 instead."
Yeah.
Not to mention
Why did Paimon just go Texan?
garbage. Paimon still thinks it should be called the rule of 4 instead.
Oh shit, about to pull out the fucking cowboy hat and gun, dude.
Not to mention other minor references like the number 4 during the Sub-Zero's festival.
True, this fucking thing still haunts me to this day, dude.
Or Sucrose's quadruple-sized Sunsetia. I digress, but let me continue putting together the story. I think ultimately Narcissenkreuz and Rhinedottir had the same goal, the creation of a Descender. But Narcissenkreuz failed outright because they misunderstood Rhinedottir's Chemia. But there's no evidence
Also, just maybe misunderstood what the fuck a Descender was, right?
to suggest that
point.
Rhinedottir succeeded either. In fact, Rhine is blamed for the Khaenri'ahn cataclysm, and both Dane and Venti expressed distrust of Albedo's Chemia. It could be that Rhinedottir messed up immensely in the greatest oopsie of all time. And perhaps this epic fail was evidence to Narcissenkreuz that Chemia was flawed. But that doesn't mean to say she didn't keep trying, and maybe she still has a chance to succeed yet. Because Albedo represents the second stage of Chemia. Chalk is the spotless soil and is used to make Primordial Man. And this brings us to the Primordial Human Project.
Oh god.
Or perhaps the Cosmic Man.
Also, can I just say, listen, I know this is more of a personal fucking gripe, but this font, whatever it is, pisses me off. It fucking annoys me. Because why is the J just a long I? Why? Give it a fucking leg at the bottom, or whatever you want to call it. Why is it just a long I, dude?
Man Project. Before I get into it, I want to emphasize that these aren't really
Give it
new
a
ideas.
seat.
Ashikai has discussed this, and Saber and Schwann wrote an amazing and very detailed post with this very idea. They came to this conclusion while diving into Kabbalah, where Adam Kadmon is a primordial man. So, there is an immense deal of overlap here. Links in description. So I basically want to present a Jungian perspective of the Primordial Human Project, the effort to create an artificial or synthetic descender.
Primordial Human Project.
Let's start off with Narcissenkreuz. Rene calculated his world formula, which predicted the end of the
Which,
world.
by the way,
and his
Narcissenkreuz quest, the quest line, one of the more interesting, like, entire quest lines in the game. Still probably wouldn't say... would I say the most interesting? I don't know, dude. I don't know. It was very interesting.
pursuit
very,
was
very
all
good.
to save the world from this apocalypse. Narcissenkreuz's goal, then, was to dissolve
Nova.
everyone and use the Holy Blade of Reason to condense a singular will that could survive the catastrophe. And by doing this, Narcissenkreuz would have a will to rival the world and become a Descender.
True.
In a note where Rene talks about Descender status, that it's not reserved for Outworlders and can belong to those who have an immense will.
Yeah, dude. This was one of the most interesting, like, notes in the entire game for me. Obviously, I think the most interesting noteworthy thing is the fucking Book of Sun and Moon. But second to that comes the auto notes that explain what a Descender actually was.
He quotes a phrase. This phrase describes a process of rebirth and also Narayana, or primordial
Yeah, Golden
human.
Slumber is definitely my favorite.
Taking this
still,
equivalence of the
so
Cosmic Man, primordial human, and Descender, the note starts to make a lot more sense. The primordial man and Descender status are both his goal, because they are one and the same. But, of course, his efforts failed. Now, contrast this with something we learned in Shadows Amidst Snowstorms. Sorry, people who started playing in 2022 or later. In the event story, a doppelganger of Albedo attempts to yeet real Albedo and replace him. We learn...
Can we just take a moment to... I don't know. Say a prayer to the players, including myself, that didn't get to experience so much fucking Albedo lore because 90% of his actual important lore is all locked in limited time events.
that this Susbedo was a...
And his best in slot weapon.
Real Albedo and replace him. We learn that this Susbedo
best in
was
slot
another
free-to-play
one
weapon, at
of
least.
Rhinedottir's creations. However, he was a failure and was fed to Durin. But he got a Durin stomach juice power-up and was able to return. Albedo, in talking about this failure, mentions the Primordial Human Project. This is literally all we know about this in-game so far. But with the Jungian context of alchemy and the Philosopher's Stone being the cosmic or primordial man, this alchemical process of individuation is likely what Rhinedottir was aiming for. The fact
Building the snowman is a metaphor for creating the primordial man. The snowman is the cosmic man. I just thought they were building snowmans because it was Christmas time.
that Susbedo is the failure then implies that Albedo may then be the most successful product of Rhinedottir's magnum opus. Consider this. In his story quest, Albedo compares himself to the Traveler quite a great deal, even going to say that they...
Again, I get confused between what Albedo's story quest was and what the events were, because the story quest was like a 5-minute long thing in my head, and the events were just so much better. So again, I feel bad for people that didn't get to play the events.
Albedo compares himself to the Traveler quite a great deal, even going to say that they are both born of chalk and different from the world. Of course, Albedo is not a descender yet, because the magnum opus is not yet complete. Because perhaps this is alchemy that Rhinedottir cannot do herself. By setting him off to find the truth of this world, this is alchemy that Albedo has to do himself for himself. And herein lies the difference between Citrinitas and Rubedo as the final stage. With Rubedo, it's an instrument. See, in some ways you could interpret the Holy Blade of Narcissenkreuz as a Philosopher's Stone used as an instrument. When we
I see what you mean, but the events were the 5-minute things. The story quest was the one that took so long. No. The events had so much more important lore for Albedo than the story quest ever did. The story quest, I'm pretty certain, took me probably like 15 minutes. The events took days and were actually like 30 minutes long minimum each day. 100%, I remember it.
Construct the Holy Blade,
the events had far more than the story quest ever did.
Approach, with combining the experiential substances of memory, wish, soul, and persona. Compare this with Jungian thought, which prescribes the integration of persona, ego, shadow, and the anima animus to create the self. I digress once again. Rene describes the Holy Blade as having descender status itself, but he still wanted to use it as a tool. In contrast, with Citrinitas as the final stage, Albedo himself is the Philosopher's Stone coming into being. And perhaps that is also why Albedo is afraid of losing control and destroying Mondstadt.
Yeah,
the
that makes
experiment
sense.
failing during the most critical part. So, creating a Descender seems to be Rhinedottir's ambition of perfection. This is the main idea I wanted to present, but there's something else I wanted to explore a little bit. Albedo is just one...
15 minutes? Did you read through the story quest or did you skip most of it? One of the events is not longer than the story quest unless you mean all the past events of Albedo, then I do agree. I'm talking about the past events of Albedo. Yes. The story quest was very short with not much information in it, if I remember correctly. The events had far more information and more interesting information about Albedo than the story quest did, is what I'm saying. That is pretty much just true as far as I can remember.
One of Rhinedottir's creations. I think his brothers also provide some interesting things about the nature of alchemy, as well as both...
15 minutes might have been a stretch, but what I'm saying is that the events were longer and more informative than the story quest.
The Traveler and their sibling.
We will be...
When we talk to Elinus, he recounts drifting in a cosmic darkness, cold and alone. That is, until his mother plucked him away from said darkness. This mother is heavily implied to be Rhinedottir, and what Elinus describes is the first stage of alchemy. The starting material, the chaotic prima materia, first goes through Nigredo, drawing from primordial forms within the chaos and the darkness. But even though Elinus and Durin were given life, the joy they felt was disconnected from reality. They did not make it to the next stage, Albedo, which represents a purging and a whitening. So Elinus and Durin were both abyssal dragons.
Yes.
And the cosmic darkness could be interpreted as the void realm, or abyss. Then, this
Probably
would
the
mean
abyss.
the abyss is the prima materia, the undifferentiated chaos from which forms can be differentiated and then processed into a transcendent substance. This has interesting implications for a descender created via alchemy. As the Cinnabar Spindle describes, separate the dust in the flames with joy, and extract the exquisite from the crude. For all in the universe comes from a single source, and all things may be derived
Damn.
from a single thought.
That's deep,
This
dude.
kind of implies Albedo was also sourced from this abyssal prima materia, but that's not surprising because he's the Chalk Prince, purified white ash
Yeah.
from black soil. There's something else that bothers me, though. Albedo compares himself to Traveler, and this makes me wonder about the Traveler's true origins.
Me too.
Additionally,
I think a lot of people do forget about that too, that he says like the Traveler's also made of chalk and stuff. I think that flees a lot of people's memories a lot of the time, including my own.
in his story quest, Albedo runs a lot of experiments on you and ends up with a vial of purple sediment. He says, "Those born of Earth are bound by its imperfections, but those born of chalk are free of impurities. You and I are alike, both composed of a substance that has yet to be fully defined." Taken together, this low-key, high-key reminds me of what the sinner said to our sibling. "You are like a flower born in sin, yet pure, spotless." The sinner went on to say, "Become a transcendent one." So, this is just me thinking out loud, a lot of speculation here, but I'm personally getting the vibe that there's a bit of a pipeline of originating from the abyss and through alchemy becoming a descender. But I'm going to leave those thoughts hanging because I don't actually have a real conclusion.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that
It's honestly
one.
just vibes only. But there is another angle I want to explore a little bit. It's the comparison between Traveler and Albedo, and also Descender and the cosmic or primordial human archetype. I think it may be able to answer a very interesting question. A question we've toiled over since the conclusion of the Sumeru Archon quest. Why is the sibling not a Descender, but Traveler is? I do think the base answer has
I genuinely think the answer is just that they don't have the will to rival worlds. I think they have everything else. I just don't think they have what we found out in the Narcissus and Kreuz questline, the will to rival worlds.
to do with one having a will to rival
I think that
a
kind of
world,
answered it for me.
but it doesn't really
Yeah.
explain what's going on. So let's dig into this using a Jungian lens.
Okay.
The siblings are so similar that they are completely interchangeable, yet at the same time, they are opposite in distinct ways. Like in their preference for summer versus winter, or
God, that's
in the
beautiful.
masculine versus feminine. And as twins, they create a unit that is whole, with totality and completeness. Now, remember the Cosmic Man, androgynous, combining the masculine and feminine, because the Cosmic Man represents the goal of individuation. Keep that at the forefront of your mind as you ask yourself, which of the twins desperately wants to reunite with their opposite half?
If you chose Lumine, just imagine Lumine here.
Which of the twins desperately wants to reunite with their opposite half? Which twin pursues integration with the other half to recreate what was once whole? Who seeks individuation? The Descender does.
Yeah.
The Traveler.
True.
So I think this is why the Traveler is a
God.
Descender and the sibling isn't. Because one is on the path to individuation and the other isn't. I also think this is why Traveler is a Descender, but why they aren't quite full power yet.
That would make sense.
Because I think it's more than just about collecting the elements. It's ultimately about being reunited. I want to close this out with a few thoughts I couldn't fit elsewhere, largely because they're a little cracky. First, I think it's super hilarious how in the second Golden Apple Archipelago, playable Fischl integrates with her shadow. You know, undergoing individuation to unearth the true self and become a cosmic man. Because,
and with that, we got an
Fischl
absolutely fucking banger OST that we'll never hear ever again. Although I say that, but we did hear the Bottleland OST again in this recent fucking Alchemy event, so maybe we'll hear the official Battle Domain theme again.
From the Mr. 9 novels, created another universe and founded Paradise. And you could argue is also a descender. I've actually argued that, so check that out for context. Second, in thinking about this integration during individuation, I was reminded of parallels between the Traveler and their sibling, to Furina and Focalor. Focalor didn't create Furina, she just separated her humanity and divinity from the original Focalor. Like a descender and one of this world, perhaps. So they are one in the same, but opposite. This made me think about other dualities and twinning in-game, and it made me wonder. Nahida and Rukkhadevata.
You know what's kind of fucking hilarious? You know when everyone always talks about there's always, like, references to, like, twins or, like, twin theories about, like, you know, Furina, Focalor, Nahida, Rukkhadevata, like, duality and all that shit. Obviously, you've got Venti and the Wind Spirit and stuff, and basically all the Archons having, like, duality sides. Everyone always forgets that the Traveler also does. Like, that's something even I do. That never springs to the forefront of my mind.
Are never described as twins, but they're still the same, but totally not, separated by time. So I wonder if you can draw a slightly different comparison with Traveler and the sibling, who together make a whole and may also be separated by time. You are me in the next samsara, as Rukkhadevata said, but once you've walked the path that I have, you'll understand the truth of this world, said the sibling. And finally, rereading the Narcissenkreuz note about Citrinitas and Rubedo, it honestly sounds like they think Khaenri'ahn was just trying to make literal gold, but instead made bread? Which would be funny because making literal gold is trivial, because Albedo implies in a voice line that he can just make gold.
Yeah.
Also, fun fact,
doesn't surprise me.
You would actually need a star at least 8 times more massive than our sun to get a supernova, which is how gold forms. So Albedo is technically right about that.
Wait, that's insane.
Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you all for watching. This was a long one, and as many know, I'm allergic to long videos, but I obviously was enraptured by the Jung deep dive.
Yeah, that was a great video.
Please like, comment, and subscribe. Especially on this video, I just told you I'm allergic to long videos,
Let me link that one for you,
so
chat.
I really went through the ringer for this. So,
No, that was great. That was a very good video, Roosevelt. I liked that one a lot.